Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rallyday Partners, and this is the Founders Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Founders Journey podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Heckman, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting a force of nature today, Linda Rottenberg. Linda is the founder, CEO. The other title has something to do with some godliness factor of source of energy for many of the world's economies. She founded an organization called Endeavor Global some years ago. It is now an organization that connects entrepreneurs from across the world to each other and to markets from across the world and each other. Endeavor today is in 45 different countries. They've got a team of 600 people. I think you're on 5 of the 7 continents, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 6 by now. I don't know, Linda, but
working on the 6th. And actually, technically, one of our Chilean entrepreneurs does things on Antarctica. So we will be.
Okay, fine.
And Oceania. I think we're in 7 because we have New Zealand, we're working on Australia, and we have Antarctica via Chile. So I'm going with all of them.
Fine. I'll give it to you. This is a real treat. You know, the purpose of the Founders Journey podcast was always to take conversations that I got to have with people like Linda and record them because I was going to do it anyway, and then share it with our community. And I have never gotten to spend an hour with Linda Rottenberg. It's like one of these things where she's on stage and I get to maybe say hi during a cocktail hour. But the moment I met her was here in Denver, Colorado. Denver was kind of a flyover state some years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And our governor at the time, Governor Hickenlooper, who's now a senator, always had this aspiration to, quote unquote, not be a flyover state. And my 2 partners, co-founders at Rallyday and I, Mark Hopkins, Nancy Phillips, we always volunteered into that work. And part of that mission kind of bugged me because it was like too small. It's like, oh, we just want people to fly in when they're flying to San Francisco or New York or whatever. Linda came to Denver with an entirely different orientation. It was, how do we bring the world to Denver, and how do we bring the Colorado entrepreneurial ecosystem to the world? And that just seemed so much more inspiring to me. My 2 other partners in crime at the time, Mike Fries, who's the CEO of Liberty Global, Kent Theory, who at the time was CEO of DaVita. Oh, and I should add, I can't believe I almost did this, Dan Caruso. I should have named him first for anybody, but Dan.
Maybe that's your last, Dan, if you're listening to this.
Don't be mad at me, please. Dan built Zayo Group. Linda served on his board. Dan has, through might and muscle and capital contribution, really built with Linda's team one of the more powerful forces within the network here in Denver and accomplishing everything that we dreamt of. But we were in the past landlocked, and today the entrepreneurs that build and scale their companies here can reach out to the world through Endeavor Global, and it's a very powerful economic engine for our state, and certainly a way for our founders to go even bigger and think, maybe dream a little bit bigger as well. Welcome, Linda. I love that you're here. This is such a treat. Tell me what you're up to in this moment.
I love being here. I used to get to go to Denver and Boulder 4 times a year when I was on the Zayo board. So I miss it. So I feel like I'm getting my little dose of Colorado. And Ryan, it's just so wonderful to be with you, as well. Speaking of forces of nature, as, entrepreneur, Olympiad, and all your different endeavors that you turn into records. But before we get into Endeavor globally, since you brought up Colorado and Denver, I want to just say how inspired I've been to see these companies in deep tech and tech emerge out of Colorado, Denver in particular, and go global. So whether it's Maybell Quantum, that Corbin is building the largest underwater refrigerator for all of quantum computing, and came with an Endeavor delegation to Dubai and Riyadh last year to meet, business leaders there and share his story, to Watchmaker Genomics. And Trey has an office in South Africa and came through one of our international selection panels in South Africa because he wanted to see his team in person and be part of a global network, to Magic Schools that is doing AI for education and already connecting with our ed tech platforms, to Jump Cloud and Rajat and Antoine. Every week they're in a different country, including going back to Antoine's home country of Beirut. And then most recently, just last week, we selected Justin of Lunar Outpost. And how great is it that, Colorado is going to be responsible for a company that is putting rovers on the moon and doing hardware and software. And we happen to, at Endeavor, have a number of the world's top space tech companies in the world, including a company called ICEYE that is based in Finland, a Polish founder that is one of the most successful space tech companies now in Europe. We just selected a company in Spain, Jupel, that is doing the data side of space tech. And so to be able to plug Justin and Lunar Outpost into this global network, that is, we'll get into more of what Endeavor does, but I just want to give Denver and Colorado a shout out, because it's been fantastic to find these entrepreneurs who are not only even landlocked, they're no longer just US focused. They are thinking globally from day one. And we love that. And my belief is that Denver and Boulder will become a deep tech hub worldwide. I really believe that.
Well, it means a lot to us, Linda, that you all invested into our community at that time, and to see what it's become as someone who supported that effort financially and otherwise. It's one of the more powerful civic contributions I've made as a business leader. So thank you. I do want to end with just two compliments about Linda. One, there are people who maybe present strength, and there are those who radiate power. And Linda is one of these people, when you see her on stage or in a cocktail party or in a one-on-one, there's just something that radiates from inside of her that you literally can feel, not just see or hear. And then the second one is this quality of people that we call aggressive and humble at the same time. And this aggressive humility, as we call it, where someone is like super aggressive, 10 out of 10, but also 10 out of 10 humble. And the combination of her power and through her presence and her genuine aggression and humility at 10 out of 10 just makes this leader who we are joined with today just an exceptional role model for all of us. So I'll put that aside.
It can only go downhill from here, right?
I doubt that, Linda.
That was the nicest setup I've ever gotten, but now everyone's going to be like, you are overdoing it.
No, that's how I feel. Take us back to 1997 when you started Endeavor, and maybe take us through the zero version of that might have just been a dream, to the one, and just what was going on in your life at that time. Why did you pick Buenos Aires as your first dot on the 7 continents? And how did you get the flywheel of Endeavor started? And why did you do it, I guess?
Yeah, well, I'll go back even further. I was born in Newton, Massachusetts, and I grew up in, mall culture, suburban culture. My dad's a lawyer. My mom had been a teacher, but really became a stay-at-home mom. And I had this wonderful, secure upbringing. And I said I wanted to get out of the suburbs and out of Boston, though my girls will hear my Bostonian comments and say, you can take the girl out of Boston, but you can never take Boston out of the girl. But I felt like, okay, I can take a little bit more risk, right? I had the security, and I feared boredom. I don't know why, but that was my fear. And I went to college, and the beginning of my senior year and of my junior year in college was when the Berlin Wall was coming down, when Tiananmen Square was happening. I was seeing so much change happening outside of the US. I found this really, energizing. I went straight through. I'd gone to Harvard undergrad. I went to Yale for law school, and I got stuck. And I realized that everyone in my law school class, if they didn't want to become a lawyer, they wanted to become a Supreme Court judge, or they wanted to go work for Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. No, didn't we get the memo that you can just, come and do anything you want? And I was one of only 2 people in my class that didn't have the next 2 or 3 years planned with clerkships and the job after. And professors, I say, took pity on me. And there was this opportunity to go down to Latin America, to Buenos Aires and Santiago, back and forth, and work with Yale on a couple of projects. And I went and I sort of fell in love with the culture. I started watching the soccer games. I learned, tango and Spanish. But more importantly, I was down there and then I worked for an organization called Ashoka that was helping social entrepreneurs. And I kept saying, we're the business entrepreneurs. There's like 10 families that controlled all the wealth, all the networks, all the power. And in the mid 90s, this was the era when Steve Jobs was coming back to Apple Computer. It was when Netscape and Yahoo were IPOing, and everybody I knew back home was dreaming of becoming an entrepreneur. And this idea of, the garage to, IPO story was taking root. And I remember starting to tell the story of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And one day a kid came up to me and said, Linda, that's a nice story, but I live in Latin America. No one's giving me money for my crazy idea, and I don't even have a garage. And it was that, and combined with the fact that I tell this story of being in a taxi where my driver had an engineering degree and didn't know the word because there was no popular word for entrepreneur in Spanish or Portuguese at the time, let alone Arabic or Turkish. One of my most favorite things about Endeavor is we helped popularize words like emprendedor and emprendedorismo and get them into literally the Brazilian dictionary now. Aurelio has those words because of Endeavor popularizing. So I was like, wow. If you're not from one of the top families, there's not even a word to tell your parents what you want to do. There's no local role models. That was where the idea started from. And enough people called me crazy. That's how I got my Chica Loca name, that I said, all right, well, usually if you're being called crazy, that usually means you're onto something. And I was introduced to my co-founder, who was at HBS at the time, Harvard Business School. And we just set out, and I can tell a few stories, but we set out and we said, all right, we're going to find a few entrepreneurs, a few people taking risks that no one's ever heard of. And if we can help that one person, maybe this will create the snowball effect. So that's really all we had to go with when we started in 1997.
Wow. And how long did you just focus on that particular market before you said to yourself, all right, it's now time to scale this thing? And maybe walk us through the important chapters and end with where you are today in terms of impact and scope of operations and so forth.
Yeah. All right. I'll try to do this quickly because I know you want to get to the meatier topics, but we started in Argentina and Chile. And it was in Argentina that I met this 24-year-old sheep farmer from Patagonia named Wences Casares, who had created the first internet service provider in Argentina. He thought sold it in a good deal and literally was locked out of the company the next day. His credentials didn't work. And they said, sorry, you have nothing, kid. And instead of going back to the sheep farm, he decides to build the E-Trade of Latin America. And by the time I met him, Wences, he'd been turned down by 34 local investors. And I said, all right, this is going to be our case study number one. And we ended up wheeling. I had meetings in California and New York and nothing to show. So I said, Wences, you come with me. I'll introduce you to Bill Draper, the venture capitalist, and to Fred Wilson, the venture capitalist in New York. And let's see. And Fred Wilson, now of Union Square Ventures, then of Flatiron Partners, invested $4 million in this kid. I'll never forget. It was $4 million at a $12 million valuation, and said, all right, I believe in him. I believe in this idea of the E-Trade of Latin America. Everyone thought he was crazy. We helped get Wences as COO. He ends up marrying my assistant. So as I like to say, Wences got the full service Endeavor. And 18 months later, he sells that company, Patagon.com, to Banco Santander for $750 million. In today's, that's about $1.2 billion today. All 34 investors call me up and say, okay, you got another we get this now, you got somebody else. And people come from Brazil and the two people who heard about this were two Stanford Argentines studying at Stanford who were going to stay in the Valley and decide, because of Wences' story, hey, wait a minute, maybe instead of going to work for eBay in San Francisco, maybe or Palo Alto, we'll take the eBay model and move it to Latin America. And they build Mercado Libre. They become an Endeavor entrepreneur. Today, it is the highest valued company. It crossed $100 billion. It's the highest valued company on the continent of Latin America, more than any oil company, more than any telecom, and they were these two kids. And so once we had Mercado Libre and Patagon, suddenly people started calling us from Brazil, from Mexico, saying, hey, we need to find entrepreneurs here. Can you help us? Can you bring Endeavor's model? And then that really expanded to South Africa and the Middle East. And as you said today, We have offices in more than 45. We're actually closing in on 50 countries. And we have entrepreneurs operating in 65 countries. And because we have, for example, a company, a fintech that was built out of Argentina, but for Venezuela. And today, 3% of Venezuela's GDP runs on this company, Cachea, because they needed to get people access to payments, right? We have a company that's operating out of the UAE, but for her native Sudan, also in fintech. We have companies in logistics entering Iraq, but out of the UAE or Lebanon. So we have entrepreneurs operating in these 65 countries. And here, two more things. One is that Endeavor, we describe ourselves as the leading global network of by and for high impact entrepreneurs innovating elsewhere. And I think the key phrases in that are, what is high impact? For us, it's high growth, but it's high growth with the values, like you have, Ryan. You said you want to contribute back to your community. And we believe the way entrepreneurs can contribute back most to their community is by becoming what Endeavor calls multipliers. And we actually have a research team that studies the entrepreneurs who mentor, who invest in, who train the next generation, end up having that flywheel effect, as you all did by bringing, Endeavor in, and the mentoring and investing you all do as entrepreneurs and business leaders. So that's what we mean high impact. And elsewhere really is our words. Instead of emerging markets, we operate in Europe too. We operate in underserved, parts of the so-called emerged world, but that are not Silicon Valley and China. Because what's happened, especially with AI, is that innovation is seen as only existing on 2 points on the map. And what we said is no. Talent is everywhere. Innovation can come from anywhere. And we believe the future is elsewhere. We just need to make sure that the opportunity, the capital, and the storytelling is evenly distributed. The last thing I'll say, and today, by the way, I should say that Endeavor, so we've screened over 60,000 entrepreneurs. We selected 3,000, entrepreneurs. They generate close to $100 billion in revenue. We have won 100 of the world's unicorns, so 100 of the world's companies that are valued at $1 billion. In many countries, these were the first in their country who could reach that, because everyone thought you had to build and stay small. And we're giving them access to this global peer network. And then we have a co-investment fund that invests alongside. And what's exciting is that 50% of the returns go to our investors and 50% goes to make the nonprofit self-sustaining. So the idea is in the next 5 to 10 years, the entire organization will be fully sustained by the returns of the entrepreneurs. So there's more to talk about, but that's where we are today.
It's one of these moments in something like this where if you're listening, maybe hit pause on your podcast and just let all those numbers sink in. It just gives me goosebumps, Linda. It's not just what you've become, it's the elegance of the model itself that came out of your head and in your heart and became manifest. And I don't want to keep going there, but I can't help it. But it's just such a powerful story. To me, one of my favorite moments watching you do your work around the world was when you were in Greece. Take us to that moment. And what I've been dying to ask you is if you slept that night.
Yeah,
that role on YouTube is amazing. At the base of the Parthenon, when you did the speech with Greece's prime minister.
Yeah. So one of our most amazing chapters is in Greece. And it started actually, the prime minister was a friend of mine from college. And he kept saying, oh, we need Endeavor in Greece. We need Endeavor in Greece. And I was like, no, we're in emerging markets. And then his wife, who was herself an entrepreneur and had worked in finance, called me up after 2008 and said, look, Greece is really hurting and we really need Endeavor. And she was, we joke, more persuasive than he was. So we went in, and I was interviewed at that point by Andrew Ross Sorkin on Squawk Box saying, if Endeavor was going to go to Europe, why on earth would you start in Greece? And what I said then, which is true today, is that when economies turn down, entrepreneurs turn up. And then I added, an Endeavor shows up. One of my proudest things today, I hope we get to later, is Endeavor in Ukraine. We now have 10 companies that we've selected in Ukraine in the last year, and it's unbelievable. So at that point, being in Greece was not an obvious thing. And what was great is that we got not only the business community rallied around bringing Endeavor to Greece, but the prime minister himself really made attracting entrepreneurs back to Greece, the diaspora. They have a big diaspora, a big part of his platform. And so he, from the beginning, this is Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, has partnered with Endeavor for a long time. And there is this extraordinary venue that is, as you said, it's at the southwest slope of the Acropolis. It is the oldest amphitheater in the world. And it has been open only for concerts and plays, theatrical productions. And in fact, 3 years ago or two, we opened it up because of our chairwoman, Costanza, who's incredible. She actually worked with the Ministry of Tourism to open this up. And I did this event at the Herodian, it's called, with the Prime Minister and Ted Sarandos of Netflix. And Ted Sarandos was just coming back to Greece. He's actually Greek American, to film what was then Knives Out 2. We didn't know it at the time, but and so we did this event and it worked so well. And they got 5,000 people. And here it is at the base of the Acropolis, that the Prime Minister and our MD of Endeavor Greece, Panos, said, you know what, let's do this again. And this time with Demis Hassabis, who is the founder of Google DeepMind. We need to understand AI. We need to understand it from the entrepreneur's perspective, from the business leader's perspective, and from the political leader's perspective. And let's have a conversation. And so, yes, we gathered another 5,000 people at the Southwest Slope, and it was amazing. And Demis himself also is part Greek. And to see this guy who's now on the top of the world being asked about AI all the time, and he was so overwhelmed. It's overwhelming, right? Because he'd studied the great philosophers. But what he said, which really resonated with a lot of people, is, look, Demis kept DeepMind before he sold it to Google in London when all my investors told me to move to Silicon Valley. And I did it because I felt like innovation needed to be on more than 2 points of the map. So he expressed the same values of Endeavor elsewhere. And it just was really, I don't know, you were there, so you can know, it was very powerful. And did I sleep? I kept pinching myself. Just put it that way. It was a beautiful, beautiful event.
Yeah, I mean, it might be one of those things that when you're actually on the stage, you don't see the totality of the context because you're performing, tap dancing, you're trying to keep to your notes, to remember what you have to say, and you're really focused on performing. But for those of us that got to watch from the cheap seats, so to speak, I was just curious. So, I mean, you've been doing this work for, what is that, 30 years almost, right? Or is that right?
Yeah, I was 5. No.
No.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
It's almost
Sorry, I just turned 52. That makes you feel like better.
Yeah, almost 30 years. Yeah.
30 years. And so I was just thinking, like, if one was to have a moment of capstone in one's life where you've transcended success to significance, I could have dropped the mic if I were you at that moment.
Well, there's two interesting things. First of all, what's so beautiful about that is, especially, now that we're only talking about AI, is it's such a human place. And to be there and to get to talk with Demis and with the Prime Minister about the ancient Greek philosophers, right? So to root the future in the past was really powerful. And I think we need to do more of that. But the amazing thing about this stage, and I'm sure you have too, I've spoken in a lot of venues that I find really intimidating and scary. They are just, they just are. This is very intimate. It's super interesting. So when you're on that stage, and I asked the Prime Minister, how many times had he done it? He's only done it the same 2 times. He's only done it. He's like, I'm not allowed in here. I'm to speak. Endeavor got us in. I was like, what? Really? But
he might be aggressively humble.
He's aggressively humble, but it's actually true. Our chairwoman there pulled, so I don't know what she did, but I think that's what was so interesting. It wasn't this it was awesome in that sense of the word, but it wasn't intimidating. It was so human. It's so, the people are right there. You said cheap seats. There are no cheap seats. You could see every single person. I think, and it brought us to this work where we're dealing with AI, we're dealing with tech. As I said, we're dealing with things that are so just intangible or remote. And to have that physical connection with people, you realize the power of these ancient gatherings. My husband, Bruce Feiler, is writing a book about ritual, and it felt like a ritual. And it felt like here we were talking about the future and yet so grounded in this past that is so human. That's actually what I felt. So thank you for asking about it. But it was less mic drop and more, wow, those ancients really got it right. We have improved on nothing since.
It's funny. I mean, just this weekend, I read a quote from Winston Churchill very randomly, and I'll butcher it, but it said, the longer back in history we learn, the further out in the future we can create.
Mm.
And it's a really cool
I love that.
lesson in first principles and
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about. And AI just gives a very profound version of that, because even the name artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
but without human wisdom, can do nothing.
Yeah. And I will say that, we're dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs in either that are being challenged, their business models are being challenged by AI and they're trying to grapple with it. We also have in our network some of the top AI companies in the world, 11 Labs, these two Polish guys who got sick of the bad Polish dubbing in movies and created 11 Labs, which is today recognized as the world leader in voice AI, valued at over $11 billion. Replit, a Jordanian founder in Silicon Valley that has built the world's leading vibe coding app and others. And I think the pace at which people are moving is so fast. And I think that times to remember to slow down is really important. And as you said, the wisdom from one another, it's partly from the past and partly from the peers. And just to give an example of something that happened on Monday is we operate a lot in the Middle East. Endeavor has offices in 8 countries in the Middle East, not Israel, but a lot of the Arab-speaking countries. And our entrepreneurs in Dubai and Lebanon have been, dealing with missiles coming close to their workplaces, and they said, "We don't know what to do. We've never." In Lebanon, they were used to it. In Dubai, this is totally new. And they said, "Does anyone have any experience? Because we're figuring out what to do with employees, how to manage cash flow, what to do if funders are not going to come to the region that was supposed to be safe. Like, what do? We don't know how long this is going to go on. How do we comfort people and yet lead them into the future?" And so what we did is we organized a webinar with 3 of our top Ukrainian founders, because they said, they volunteered and they said, "Hey, for better or worse, we have a lot of experience dealing with missiles, coming into our daily existence, and how we've had to lead through and lead into hope and manage employees, but do so in a way where we're, as someone said, become a donor, not a martyr. Like, don't bleed out. Like, you've got to staunch the wound and just and give people hope on the future." And that was so interesting that here, like, who would think of that? But being part of this network where you can go to a Ukrainian who's been a little bit further along the trauma of war, building a war journey, was just something that reminded me that at the end of the day, so many of these issues are human. So even with technology, a lot of the same challenge we have come down to like human emotions.
That's really well said and good storytelling. And actually a pretty good segue. I mean, I emailed Linda after, I think I badgered her for at least a month to do this. So maybe in my 3rd or 4th email, I was like, "Listen, I don't want a bullshit fluff podcast thing. I want to take a deep dive into a topic that is really meaningful to the work that we're doing here at Rallyday Partners." And it was really about this notion of what we call belief capital.
Mm.
And the context for that is the private equity industry, where I've spent my last 27 years, has earned and strongly earned a reputation for not being terribly hospitable to the spirit of the founder and really offering one form of capital, which is financial capital. And my 2 co-founders and I, early days, said, "No, we can be so much more than that." My 2 partners and I have all built operating businesses as founders and CEOs, and we happen to run a private equity firm called Rallyday Partners. And it's an entirely different context. And we needed to create a standard for what was our product going to be. And we came up with these 4 dimensions of capital. One was obviously financial capital. We know what that means. Another one is experiential capital, which is to say that when we engage with our portfolio companies and their leaders, we're coming from a place of having made every mistake that they've ever made and with a genuine interest to help versus govern. We hate that word.
Yes.
Governance. A third one is human capital. And so for many of these emerging companies, their ideas are bigger than their teams. And in some ways, their reach is too far for their grasp in terms of human talent. And we wanted to try to help them with their human capital plans so that, that was never an impediment to their dreams. And the fourth one was what we call creative capital. And the private equity industry has, again, a well-earned reputation for being an industry of extraction as opposed to an industry of creation. And that's a really different orientation. And in the last couple of years, we've added a fifth, which sits in the middle of all four in a PowerPoint deck. And it's called belief capital. And that has to do with the fact that at least when we were founders, and I think back to my journey, the worst moments in my life were at 2 a.m. to maybe 4:30 in the morning when I would wake up and feel desperately alone. Mm-hmm. I was eventually owned by a private equity firm, and I felt a great deal of accountability, but never really felt genuine belief. And it got us wondering here around how we can curate belief capital across our portfolio at scale, and what that could mean in terms of the outcome, but how do we make it real and something as tangible as the financial capital? And so I wanted to spend at least 20 minutes with Linda talking about where she was in Buenos Aires going from 0 to 1, and how she believed in herself so others would believe in her and her model, and then how Endeavor Global provides this at a scale that in 50 cities around the world on 7 continents has become infinitely scalable. I want to learn from that, Linda, and then share that with our community. And that was my big why I wanted to talk to you today.
I love that rubric. I was woken up between 2:30 and 4 this morning by my husband, not by an entrepreneur, but by my husband, who's about to publish his 15th book. This is called A Time Together, and it's about ritual. And he went on these incredible rituals, experiential rituals, speaking of experiential capital, across the world, and feels like in this world where we're being torn apart, where we're atomized, we need ritual to bring us all back together. And yet he has to do something, which is record his podcast, and he has a bad leg and he didn't get sleep and he was so stressed out and he's like, and no one will help me and my career's dying and no one buys books anymore. No one reads anymore. And I thought, okay, this is why I live this in my home. and I was like, yeah, look, you don't have a team. You need, I think, belief capital, by the way, believing in yourself, having others believe in you. And then what I call psychic equity. I think so many people talk about financial equity. Unless you have psychic equity, which is people, excited about the mission, excited about building something bigger than themselves, all of this falls apart, especially at the moments when you see today stock prices going down, valuations going down. If all you've had is financial equity, that tool, when it's going up and to the right is great. And when it goes down is problematic. If you have this belief capital or the psychic equity, then people have other reasons, to stay and to believe in the dream. So I just wanted to say that. And look, I think before I talk about Endeavor as the hybrid, I'll talk about Endeavor Catalyst, which is our fund. We're about to close our 5th fund. And, we've now had hundreds of $1 million under management. And we invest up to now $3 million in each company. And some of these rounds are very competitive. And what we always say to the entrepreneurs is we're going to come in a rules-based way. So every entrepreneur that raises a round that is led by a qualified investor, and we have some rules, we're going to come in. So we're not picking and choosing on our children. And no matter what, we're going to be entrepreneur first. So when funders pulled out of Turkey, we stayed, right? When entrepreneurs ask us to sell, even if everybody else is getting greedy and allegations, we'll sell. We will do whatever it is because we found, as you said, we have wonderful partners in VC and private equity, but at times the interests are misaligned with the founders. And as you who've built things before, I think that the ability, first of all, to see it through a founder's eyes, having gone through, as you said, the mistakes, lived the pain, and also just making sure when they have someone who's really on their side, who's really founder first, it's so rare, so rare. So I couldn't agree with you more. And bravo for, shining a spotlight on this. And I think that for me, what kept me going was from day one, I said, hey, I'm not building some big foundation that has all the money or the knowledge. And I'm not building some venture capital firm that has all the money and has all the knowledge. And I said, we are co-creating. So back to Wences and Marcos, they joined our board. They invest in the fund. A third of our LPs are our entrepreneurs who invest. Over half of our board members now are Endeavor entrepreneurs who've succeeded and are now paying the success forward. We have certain countries, Egypt, Argentina, now Brazil, almost entirely led by our Endeavor entrepreneurs that have taken over. So it was this spirit of we're co-creating this together. And unless you tell us what's missing, what to do, and what you need more of, that's how we're going to build it. But in return, we're going to ask you for your time. The advice, like when we select the next entrepreneur, you are going to be the first one we call. So we have somebody now, this Italian company, Bending Spoons. It's an incredible company. And I remember that Steve Case, the founder of AOL, had been one of our panelists, not on this panel, but another, and said, "Oh, Linda, nice that you're doing these companies, outside the US. Maybe one will get big enough that, AOL will buy it one day." Well, guess what? This company, Bending Spoons, bought AOL. It bought AOL, it bought Eventbrite, it bought WeTransfer. And we said, "Okay, Luca, now every entrepreneur that needs to know how to do M&A, we're taking them to you." He's like, "Okay." I know that a lot of VC firms or private equity firms try to get their portfolios together, but I think that if you can do it in a way, as I said, that's giving that sense of belonging, that sense of real community, and like you said, that you're actually making a difference. Also, this is the way you're paying it forward. I think we need more of that. And unfortunately, I don't think the industry that's only about maximizing its returns and not necessarily doing that very well either, needs to have a rethink.
Yeah, I mean the industry, surprisingly, when you look at it from the manager perspective, where Rallyday lives as a manager, that's what our limited partners call us,
Uh-huh.
is asset managers, which I wince at both these words. We're leaders first, not managers, and we don't manage assets. We lead people and their
Yeah,
hearts.
exactly. Founders, people.
But nevertheless, the punchline here is that it's interesting to me that amidst all of the innovation that the VC and private equity industries have catalyzed, the model of the private equity firm and the VC firm has not changed in 40 years. It's kind of the same instrument, same sheet of music, maybe different day, different year, different decade, but it's a pretty staid, boring business model that hasn't changed all that much for a very
Well,
long
I would
time.
say it's actually changed in a consolidated way. So what I would say is, yeah, I mean, I agree with your point that it needs to reinvent itself. I would also say that, it used to be that true venture capitalists were taking risks. It was seen as patient and brave capital. It was seen as having a long-term 10 to 12 or 14-year trajectory. That got shaved down to, 5 to 7 years or 7 to 10 years in terms of LPs' expectations. And now, what was it? Like 5 firms raised over 40% of all the venture capital last year, maybe even more. That's crazy. And so if you're a VC firm and you're raising billions of dollars, then what it means is you're either not doing the early stage rounds, you're actually becoming private equity, or you're putting too much capital in these early stage rounds. And we keep repeating the mistakes. So what happened back in 2021 is Tiger and SoftBank were giving companies that should have raised maybe 30 million, 40 million, 200, 100 million, $200 million. And then telling them to spend it and then saying, whoa, 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 no, don't spend it, become profitable. There's like, wait a minute, what? And entrepreneurs, you could say, oh, well, they got greedy. It was their fault. It's not their fault. They were told, if you don't take this $100 million, even though you only asked for 25, we're going to fund your competitor to crush you. And now we're seeing it again, just 10x that. And it's like, oh no, it's AI. But like at some point, we're going to see the crash and burn. And how much of this, I would say, is driven by the new technology, which we know AI is real and that's, and quantum is coming, back to Maybell Quantum, or how much of it is driven by the business model of these private equity and venture capital firms that have raised too much of their own darn capital and have to put too much to work in one company. And I think that's where we're really skewed, is we're not seeing the only good thing here is what we are seeing bridging the gap are founders becoming the angel investors. And that's where you have, like you're doing at Rallyday, the experienced capital. That's where you're having the founder driven, rounds at that seed and pre-seed stage.
That's really well said. And that may be the reckoning that happens. And like any crises or challenge and existentially bad thing that happens in the world, something comes out of that in a form of a phoenix that's better than it was before. And like you, I'm hopeful that the industry will be in a place of change and evolution as opposed to, devolving, as maybe we could argue it has been over the last 20 years. And I think the founders, and many of these folks that are building VC and private equity platforms out there, that may be the new model.
And the other is elsewhere. When we started, there was no venture capital in any of these markets, right? None. And I think that what is exciting is seeing founders, like actually the CFO and COO of Mercado Libre left after IPO and formed Kazakh Ventures. It's the leading venture capital firm in Latin America. founded by entrepreneurs, for entrepreneurs. And I think we're going to see that. We already see in many of the countries. I know, like Bending Spoons, I mentioned, they're all investing as angel investors. I could name, entrepreneurs in all these countries, and they're bridging a gap where in these countries, even now in Ukraine, we're one of our newest countries, almost all the founders, it's like 5 local firms. Endeavor Catalyst is we'll make our 4th investment next week, and we'll become one of the top investors outside in Ukraine who's non-Ukrainian. And I think that what's exciting is this opportunity, because back to elsewhere and back to the other problem with venture capital and private equity is it's been so concentrated, not only in a few companies, but a few geographies. And even in Colorado, you were told, hey, you can raise your Series A, but you want to raise your Series B, come to Silicon Valley, or you can't live here, And now this idea that, no, we want to have kids and raise them elsewhere. We want to go back home. Why can't we do that? And I think now with AI, with vibe coding, we need to build these ecosystems. This is one of the things Endeavor's doing, and this is one of the things that you've helped do back in Colorado and we're doing around the world, is to say it's not just, if you want to grow, move to Silicon Valley, move to Shenzhen. You can be anywhere, but you're going to have to be part of the solution. You're going to have to contribute your time, not only to your company and your employees, but to your ecosystem. That's what gives me hope.
Well said. Its own version of belief, I suppose. Biographically, it's easy to say and look at you today and the impact that you've created and the organization that you have built, and it just seems so well packaged. It's like there's this elegant thing called Endeavor Global. Here are the stats. Here's its impact. Here's the number of employees, the revenue. If it's okay with you, could you walk through just a few moments of self-doubt that you had along the way, Linda, and that particular moment's version of belief that it required to get you through it, and then end with where you are today, because maybe it's a different doubt in your head today. Maybe it's, I've already built this thing. I don't know what my next is, or I don't know how I can top the event that we hosted in Greece. I've left my mark. So I'm guessing that this version of doubt for you, having scaled something from literally zero to Endeavor Global today, we might miss an opportunity to hear from you how humble that journey actually was. But give us a few instances where you remember saying, I'm screwed, this isn't going to work, and I'm in deep trouble, and I'm scared to death.
Yeah, there's so many. So I'll pick a few. I think that, there's something early on, I found it almost easy. I was called Chica Loca. I was called the crazy girl. No one believed. But what's the downside? Like, you try, if you don't, I was like, okay, maybe I'll have to go back and go to, consulting, or become, God forbid, become a lawyer, which I never was wanted to do, or a banker. But I said, I'm going to try, and I've nothing. And, you're fighting it up against the wall and proving it. And that's almost easy because that's adrenaline. I think it was scary when it was like 4 or 5 years in and it's still hard. I'm like, how is it so hard? And we're doing this and no one understood. You say it's elegant. We were so misunderstood for so long, because first we were this nonprofit helping these high growth for-profits, and no one understood that. And no one would, no foundation would give us money. So we'd have to go person by person. And that's ended up being our strength, but we didn't know it at the time, because the co-creation, because we couldn't get money otherwise. And then when we were becoming this hybrid model, and with members of my board, with Reid Hoffman and Joanna Reese and Nick Beim and some members, so some of the VCs on my board, we created the rules-based Endeavor Catalyst. And that seemed to me to be so elegant. And the fact that we would be on the side of the entrepreneur, and that 50% would go back to the LPs and 50% would make Endeavor whole, and it was beautiful. So many people called me out and said, you're losing your mission. Okay, Linda, your friends are private equity and hedge fund guys, and now you're the tail's wagging the dog. I was like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? This is what the entrepreneurs want. They want us to have skin in the game. This is what's going to make Endeavor self-sustaining. We're not going to be around otherwise. And I wasn't expecting kind of the personalized attacks. And I realized, like, every time you pivot, every time you change, every time you make, it's hard. It's hard. And I was someone who, and still probably suffer from, I want people to like me. And you have to make tough decisions. And you have to realize that part of being a leader is explaining your decisions. If you go listening to people, if you make a pivot and it's wrong and it's proven to be wrong, you've got to be willing to, say mea culpa and to go a different direction. But you've got to make some hard choices. And not everyone, even if you explain, is going to like them or even like you. That was a very hard lesson for me to learn. So I think that in that moment, now it's obvious. Now a third of our, as investors, as I said, are the entrepreneurs. But so many people said, I was a volunteer for this organization and now it's becoming for profit. And I'm like, no, we're still the nonprofit. We're becoming self-sustaining. And I didn't see it, I think, from other, I thought, oh my God, this is so obvious. This is so pure. And so I think when you're not ready for those attacks, I think that was really hard. And then on a personal level, I'm a mom of twins. My identical twin daughters are about to be 21 in 2 weeks. I can't believe it. When they were 3, my husband, who I mentioned, who's a writer, and at that point was known for walking the Bible. So he had literally trekked around the world, retracing the steps of the Genesis and the Exodus and seeing if they were real. And he got diagnosed with this aggressive form of bone cancer. And so for a year, I had these 3-year-old twins. I went to every chemotherapy appointment, and then he was in a 16-hour surgery to take out his entire femur and replace it with titanium. At the time, only 2 people in the world had ever been tested on before. Today, it's actually the standard of care. Anyway, and so luckily he survived and has done really well. But at the time when I came back to the office, I remember saying to myself, because this was before Zoom, right? So I hadn't been on Zoom. I had been kind of like taking phone calls, but not at the office. And I thought, don't cry, don't show your vulnerability. You'll freak everybody out. You need to be strong. And of course, I did like a little town hall, and like 10 minutes in, I lost it. And I got through the hour or half an hour, and I went to my office and closed the door. I was so embarrassed. And I heard a knock, and 2 of my younger employees walked in and they said, Linda, we just want you to know that we've always, been inspired by the mission of Endeavor, but we always found you superhuman. And I realized they meant this in kind of a, you're not relatable kind of way. And they said, now that we saw you being vulnerable, now we'll follow you anywhere. And I said to myself, wow, the lesson that I wish I'd taught my younger self is be less super, more human. And back to where we are today in this age where we are all expected to know AI, every leader, and to go fast and to go right and to use tech and to make tough. I feel like we also have to lean into that humanity. And I think it's what people want, and yet often with the leadership books say not to do, especially I will say if you're a woman. If you're a woman, you have to be even stronger, even, tougher. And, that's not who I am by nature, but it's tough. But I think that was the hardest lesson for me to learn.
Yeah, it's interesting. My business partner, Nancy Phillips, who built a unicorn here in Denver called VioWest over 20 years. She took it from 0 of EBITDA to 119 million of EBITDA and was the CEO through all those stages: startup, scale up, full enterprise. She had 4 equity partners. And she's someone I really admire. And, working alongside her for the last 6 years, she's been trying to teach me the differences in the power and strength profile that's required of a woman versus a man. And they are very different. And hopefully we've made progress there, but we've had a lot of, beer conversations about that topic. And when you combine it, perhaps, do you do Enneagram at all, Linda? Have you done some of that work?
Absolutely.
What's your number by chance?
I'm between a 3 and a 7.
Yeah. I was going to guess you were a 3 or a 7. I'm an 8.
What are you?
The 8s are we call them crazy 8s, and most of us are that one. That the 8 almost enjoys being disagreeable, and the 3s get there entirely with different profile, but it is important along the way.
But I'm not a 2. I'm not a servant. No, I'm a 3 or a 7. Yeah.
Well, the cool thing about being a 3 and a 7 is a 7 loves to party, and you have that
little adventure. Yeah, I have the competitiveness of the 3, but as you said, but then the 7, like, let's not take it too seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why that's the loco. The 7. And by the way, for those listening, if you get a chance, we have found Enneagram to be great for self-discovery and helping us overcome our shadows, as they call them, to become better versions of ourselves. So you can find that on the web, that they're all over. It's all over the place.
And I will say, by the way, you mentioned the women, that I find it now with women, and it's been really interesting after COVID, and also to see the Gen Xers come of age and then the millennials. I actually think it's more similar now. I don't think that people have the version of the Navy SEAL or even the Jack Welch Six Sigma. I feel like people actually, even the men, are trying to balance, are trying to be dads too, and present dads. And I got to kick it during COVID to see them with the kids under the Zoom. And we've had many people take parental leave as fathers. And so I think that's what's a nice thing, is I think we're trying to find this balance. I just think it's especially hard today, where I just think the pace and scope of change is so great. And like, how do you also replenish yourself as a leader is something that our entrepreneurs are asking a lot more. Mental health as entrepreneurs had never come up. The last few years, people are talking about it. We started something called Untold Stories, where founders are becoming open about their own mental health challenges. And I think that's really healthy, but it's still an under-discussed aspect of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and to the point you made earlier, which was really cool when you said it's less super and more human. Given where you all are as an organization today, do you find as the leader that you have a hard time replenishing yourself? And how do you do that as also a mother and a wife and all these people like me begging for your time and pulling you in 100 different directions? Where does Linda find her inspiration and replenishment today versus maybe 30 years ago when you started? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, well, it is. Look, there's a time and season for everything too. My girls are off in college. When they're back home, Connor, my chief of staff, is on here, and he knows that, like, when they're here in the morning, like, I'm on, I'm going to be on mom duty, and then I'll work however late I need and come back. And I know that Darkaz Rashahi does this at Uber. So you learn to time shift. And so in fact, I've gotten some time back now that they are in college, when they're not here during the summers or breaks, or we're going to see their performances. But I think that one of the things I've had to do is bake into the day things like working out, or if I ever want to have my own appointments. Like, I was getting frustrated at night when I'm like, I'm on duty now. I'm tired. And I'm like, no, I'm going to be on duty. Like, anticipate that. Don't be surprised. So bake in some of the quote me time, not from 7 to 9 p.m., but in the middle of the day, and just make sure then you're doing right by the founders. Or it's a global thing. I can then go back and wake up. But that was an aha moment for me. And then you got to love what you do. I love what I do. So I come in, even if I'm really tired, and I turn on my Zoom, and then I see these like Ukrainian founders or these founders in Dubai grappling with what to do with their employees, and they're literally getting missiles. That's what's keeping them up at night. Whatever's keeping me up at night, it's not missiles. So that inspires me, right? And so that's what I think. I think love what you do, and passionate, but bake in time. And then I did give up. I have more time for friends now than I did for 18 years. For us, if we had 2 working parents and we wanted to be very active parents, we gave up a lot of the friends socializing. So now I get to go out a little bit more, but I don't regret any of that. I think it's very hard, to be in the best shape and be a CEO and be an active parent and go out at night and be friends. And you got to so the friend part is what I had to put on a hold. And my friends, most of them, understood. And I think that's, people can make different choices, but that was what I did. You don't get to do everything all at once.
Yeah, I hear you.
What do you do? Well, how would you answer that?
About 5 years ago, I decided to stop being a victim of it and just try to design my time in a way that I'm a big introvert. So I'm an 80 out of 100 on the Myers-Briggs introvert. So when you're in my role as a CEO of the firm, the time to be alone is really hard to find. So to solve that, and I would add, in sports, where I grew up and learned how to become, let's say elite at something, 80% of my time was spent training and 20% of my time was spent performing. And in the working world, it's the reverse of that. And I was suffering from not enough alone time and not enough learning time. And I've increasingly become more curious and I wasn't a very good student and was not very good at academics, but I really, as it turns out, like enjoy learning and am good at learning. And so I wanted to create some space to learn. And in this age of AI and at the time Wikipedia, as dated as that may make it sound now, I carved out from 5 in the morning to 10 in the morning to do nothing but be alone and learn. So that's one thing I did. But I had to ask for it, I guess, is what I would say. And then I had to put up with the grief because maybe some of the younger people in our firm thought that I was showing up at work at 10 and leaving at 4. And it was actually the introduction of Slack that made them realize that I was actually working 16 hours a day, but taking 4 hours to learn and get my own work done for them and for the sake of leading our firm. So that was helpful, but I had to overcome the stigma, I guess, of like the guy showing up at 10,
I had a version of that. You said we have 600 people, now we have 650 in Endeavor worldwide, and with a lot of boots on the ground, but we have 60 in our, New York and California, right, the headquarters. And I would come on, this is even after, Zoom got introduced, and I would come in like in the afternoons, I sometimes do a few days a week, and people are like, and someone said, well, where are you? Like, you're not talking. And I said to them, I said, I have a team of 600, not 60. And my WhatsApp starts blowing up at about 2 a.m. Because, the folks in the Middle East are on then the folks in Europe, the folks in Asia were already, starting at 9 p.m. when it's 9 a.m. there. What are you talking about? Like, I'm not just here to sit where you are because maybe there's something going. And I thought, wow, that was pretty audacious. I was at least I didn't know until that person said, I said, a lot of people must be thinking this, but I literally had to say that on multiple occasions. So I totally hear you.
And that might come with age too, where you're not so fearful about people's impressions of you and really are in service to the organization. And that does mean different things at different levels. Their version of it, for what it's worth, they're in here participating in meetings all day, and then they get all the work at the end of the day, basically. And many of them are working hardcore from 6 to 2 in the morning, and nobody sees them either, So I think there's ways to talk about this that can kind of find some common ground. I would say the other thing that I did that's similar to you, Linda, is to do the working out thing and kind of build your day around that in the middle of the day or when it's best. And don't leave it to the margin of the day because it will never come, and
it will never come. And then you get pissed off and then that's not good. That's why waking up early, if you can, is helpful. Yeah. It's funny. The other thing you said reading, and, in my world, our love language, we joke at our house is Sondheim lyrics. And my daughters, one's an art history major, one is a poet playwright, and they're both in theater. They're theater kids. And so every birthday present, every holiday gift is sort of a theater. We just took the girls to see Antigone at the Public Theater after taking them to Broadway musicals. And that is so fun for me because I think that whatever you do, in my world, you could just get caught up in talking about Claude and entrepreneurship and tech all day, every day. And I think whatever it is, like whether my sister has sports kids, so she's talking about, teen baseball and soccer, or I'm sitting here listening to my girls, deep dive into the latest in musical theater. I think we've lost that interdisciplinary thinking. And I think that's what I would encourage people to do is surround yourself, not with people who are thinking the same thoughts and doing the same thing, but just in a completely different world.
I love that. And the synergy of doing things with other people that create that sense of relational value and connection while you're learning at the same time, both of which you can apply in your business. And you get to this place, I think, where we realize there's some real synchronicity between our outside interests and pursuits and how we can bring kind of mind, heart, and soul to our work. But the soul and the heart grows mostly through experiences in other people. I had a really cool young person at the University of Colorado. I was doing something there, teaching of something, I don't remember what. And she got up and she said, Ryan, what I find is the more interesting things that I do, the more interesting things happen to me. And I just think that's such a cool inspiration that I learned from her. She was probably a sophomore or junior. And I've really thought a lot about that. And these things that we seek out do have so much legacy value to our work. Let's end.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Since you've been working with belief capital, what's the thing that surprised you most? I love that term, but I'd love to hear what's worked and what's really surprised you.
The word accountability is maybe the worst branded word in the world because it's meant to say, I've asked you to do something and I want to evaluate whether you did it or not and to what extent it was done and at what quality it was performed. And when you replace accountability with the word belief, I think what it says is it flips it on its head and says to that person, what is it that you want to accomplish that's more important than yourself and maybe more important than EBITDA? And what are those things? And when you turn accountability into belief, I think it becomes an opportunity for a firm like ours or me in my role to support someone's dreams and aspirations as a version of accountability where they're calling you to say, here's the progress that I've made. And I just wanted to share it with somebody. I wanted to put my next step towards my objective up on the quintessential refrigerator door for someone to look at. And so what I have found is that when you attach yourself to someone's dreams and give them belief, accountability takes care of itself. But it doesn't happen institutionally necessarily, although you can, in our firm, we're only 20 people, but it happens by connecting two people's hearts kind of one-on-one. You can scale the intent, you can't scale the mechanics, but we have incentivized those outcomes in our review processes and really made that part of our cultural standard making. And I don't think we'll ever get there, Linda. I mean, there's a certain part of this where I'm held accountable to our limited partners on some version of EBITDA. But when it comes to producing that EBITDA is neither a culture nor a strategy. And the inputs to that generally start in the founder's heart. And so our basic mechanical process is to make sure that we understand what that is and support the hell out of them. So I think what I've found is it's not easy, like all great things, but very powerful.
I love that. I believe in that too. And I believe in that you can have all the KPIs you want, but in our line of business where you're investing and supporting founders, like if you're on their side, if they know you will do anything for them, like that's when they'll open up. That's when you'll find problems when there's still a chance to solve them versus when it's too late. And I think people miss that. I think that, Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz wrote a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I joke that what I see is the hard thing about soft things, because I think that when we're talking about entrepreneurs, it's like, is there a product market fit? And, as you said, what's the EBITDA? What's the annual revenue? And what's the LTV to CAC? And it's fine. All those metrics are fine. But at the end of the day, so many issues is the founder building a culture that other people want to follow? Is this co-founding team going to survive? Are they going to, drive each other crazy or split one another apart? Like, so many of the things come down to these human and relational and psychological challenges as companies scale. And I think that the more you can let founders know you're on their side and get them to open up earlier, I found that that's often so underrated because they're soft.
That's that psychic capital that you guys refer to it as. And okay, I mean, listen, I want to be particularly respectful of your time, Linda, and thank you truly for this opportunity. It was extraordinary for me. I'm sure it's extraordinary to our audience. I'd love to end with just an opportunity for you to maybe thank a couple people that did believe in you along your journey and maybe provide some context to the value that they gave you and the why them created the what that Endeavor has become. I don't know if you indulge me in a couple shout outs to some people.
I love that. Sure. Let's see. In no particular order, I would say Bill Salmon, a professor at HBS who I wasn't at HBS, but I spent time there, and he really believed when no one else did and gave us credibility alongside the late, great Peter Brook, one of the founding fathers of international private equity. And the two of them took a bet on me. And I was developing this weird, at that point, nonprofit working in Latin America, emerging markets. And they spent so much time mentoring me. And Edgar Bronfman Jr. joined as our board chair in 2004 when he could have been on any board that was the fancier, more popular board in New York, and decided to take a bet on scrappy kids building this entrepreneur, because he was married to a Venezuelan and believed in entrepreneurship. There's all the entrepreneurs who've led us in to their lives and then become our biggest, champions. And then on a personal level, my family, I have a husband who had to live with a very active mom,
A local mom.
Who traveled a lot, a local mom who traveled a lot too. And when I left, I was like, "You're on duty." And to my girls who, I was leaving for a trip once, and they were 5, and one of my twins pulled on my leg and said, "Just remember, you can be an entrepreneur for a short time, but you are a mommy forever."
What is the name of that daughter, by the way?
Tybee.
Oh,
So Tybee and Eden.
He's an old soul.
Eden helps edit our Elsewhere newsletter. She's the playwright and journalist, and my team hired her freelance to actually do these letters for me. So both of them have had such a role in allowing me to be their mom, but to be present for all these other entrepreneurs and not be jealous of my time, but also remind me what's important. And so there's so many more. I mean, I could thank all of the 600 employees and those past and future. What I would say is that entrepreneurship, I don't love that all the founders get attention. It's never one human. It's never a small group of humans. If you build something really meaningful, it's a collective effort that has to involve the time, sweat, tears, financial resources of so many humans, you included, Dan Caruso included, and I could go on and on. That's been my greatest thing, is that how many people consider Endeavor theirs. That's what I love. That's what I love.
Well, that's a good place to leave this conversation. And just know that I'm one of literally thousands of people around the world, Linda, who admire you and believe in the work. And when you do have any doubt, just in your mind, try to picture 1,000 people hoisting you up, whatever that obstacle may be, because we want you to win. Because if you win, the economies around the world win, and it's multiplied through new opportunities to give to the future. So I hope that you take my admiration genuinely, and I hope that you fully grasp that I'm 1/zillionth of the people out there that have your back and believe strongly in the work that you're doing. So thank you for sharing that work with our audience. This has been wonderful. And I'm going to be in New York in May. Hopefully I can fill you for a drink or something.
I would love you to back as a selection panelist. You were amazing. So we would love you back. And yeah, let's keep dreaming together. And I will spread the word on Belief Capital. Give me all your matrix. I love that. I love what you're doing to change the industry and infuse it with these values that often don't get talked about. So thank you for allowing me to share some of our stories.
Thanks, Linda. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and particularly in service to our friends in the Ukraine and the Middle East. We wish you the very best. Thank you.